So recently, a bunch of unaired pilots found their way online, dating back to the 90s. What I want to do is, look at these pilots and determine two things. One, did it have potential? And two, how different would popular culture be if this pilot was picked up for series? Today we're opening up the pilot vault and looking at the pilot for a show called Pride of the X-Men, the original attempt at the X-Men animated series. Now, there was a time period between the end of the Flintstones and the start of The Simpsons where animation was really rough. It didn't do well. Like, there were basically zero success stories in that time frame. It's mad. Well, that's not fair. There were some good animated shows. Wait Till Your Father Gets Home did quite well. I can't really think of any others. But for the most part, animation was pretty much guaranteed to fail in this time frame. Just look at the pilot for Carlton Your Doorman. That didn't do well, did it? Now, the first thing that stands out about this pilot is the fact that Wolverine is Australian. He was Canadian in the comic, but then he was later played by the Australian Hugh Jackman. The fact that he's Australian here, though, is purely a coincidence. It was just pretty trendy at the time to make people Australian, so that's why they forced that into it. The theme music for this is certainly something. It's like a rock song. Reminds me kind of the rock theme from the terrible animated Iron Man series. I am Iron Man. We begin with an opening monologue from Stan Lee, warning us to look around us in case some of our friends are mutant. That certainly never led to anyone getting bullied, did it? We meet Magneto. We know this is Magneto because he tells us,
I am Magneto.
He's being transported by the army, having been captured and kept in some sort of force field. The colonel who was in the truck with him is racist and doesn't like him because he's a mutant. Hey, at least they're staying true to the source material, because the X-Men comics always played on that us versus them mentality, using mutants as an analogy for racism. If this colonel is still alive today, I bet you any money he voted for Trump. The colonel receives a call from a soldier telling him that the convoy is sinking. People are trying to rescue Magneto. The White Queen appears. We know this because she says her name.
Against the mental powers of the White Queen.
I love how lazy the writers are. Every character just announces their name. Anyway, she's turned the ground into quicksand, and of course it's quicksand. You couldn't get away from quicksand in the 80s. Doctor Who, Indiana Jones. Growing up, I thought that quicksand would be a lot more of a problem in my life than it has been. Who is the White Queen? I've literally never heard of her. Was she made up for this? I presume she was in the comic. Kitty Pryde turns up to Professor Xavier's school after she received a letter. Presumably it was sent like the letters in Harry Potter, or he could have just mailed it. Who knows? Kitty joins the team and we're then introduced to the X-Men, with them all appearing in a split screen on a computer, because there's nothing more exciting than a presentation to introduce your superhero team. Remember when they did that in Batman vs Superman? Introduced the Justice League via files on a computer screen. So exciting. Kids love that stuff. Professor Xavier reveals that he knows that Kitty is a mutant because his supercomputer told him so, which, you know, feels stupid. Why didn't he just let him be the one to figure it out, since he's like this psychic super genius? Why did they go, oh, the magic computer did it? Kitty is upset to learn that she's a mutant, similar to how Troy freaked out in High School Musical when he realised that he'd get bullied if he took up singing. We see the X-Men in a training facility that essentially uses the holodeck from Star Trek. We then meet Cyclops, Colossus, the Dazzler, Nightcrawler, Wolverine and Storm. Storm doesn't deliver any cool lines in this, which is a shame because she should have said her famous line from the first X-Men movie. You know what happens to a frog when it's struck by lightning? The same thing that happens to everything else. You know what's mad about that awful, terrible line? Is that it's written by one of my favourite writers, Kevin Smith. But you know, he's not perfect, is he? He did say that the other unaired pilot that we watched a few weeks ago, Manchild, was good after all, and it certainly wasn't. Wolverine is so stereotypically Australian, it's almost offensive. I want the people over at Mr. Sunday Movies to watch this. The X-Men all have to run because the lights start flashing. They've got what what is called a mutant alert. Why did they have to use the word mutant here? Did they just shove mutant in front of everything? Oh, that sprinkler? No, that's our mutant sprinkler. It's not cool. Magneto sends Juggernaut to go to Xavier's school. Professor X uses this opportunity to refer to Juggernaut as my stepbrother.
And I'm sorry to say, my stepbrother, Juggernaut.
Is he? I genuinely didn't know that. Even if that's canon to the comics, it's ridiculous that they forced it into the script. Just stupid and unnecessary. This big cool looking guy comes running along and he's just like, oh yeah, that's my stepbrother. Just stupid. Juggernaut then straight up says a line from a very different website.
No warm welcome for your dear stepbrother?
We then cut to space, where Magneto and his gang are working for some reason. Why are they in space? Can anyone explain this to me? Meanwhile, back on Earth, the X-Men return to Xavier's school, where Storm discovers that the professor is buried under like 4 rocks. Rather than just move them, she uses a tornado to move them. Seems a bit overkill, doesn't it? Just pick them up. Professor Xavier reads Magneto's mind, and he faints while doing it. Yeah, this feels like an X-Men story, alright. Ever notice how in every X-Men movie, they have to like somehow remove Xavier's powers or knock him out or something? Because he's too powerful and would otherwise just solve every problem with his powers. The X-Men go to space in their spaceship that they just have. Fine, we'll accept it. Pride is told to stay on Earth, but she sneaks on board the spaceship. Luckily enough, they just so happen to have a spare suit that fits her. That's convenient, isn't it? Cyclops cuts a hole in the side of the spaceship by shining his laser beams through his like space helmet. But wouldn't that mean that there's a huge hole in his helmet and he just dies? And even if he did survive this, they wouldn't be able to survive on a ship with a big hole in the side of it. Wouldn't it just implode, like collapsing on itself? Well, that doesn't seem to be a problem because they then wander around the ship without their helmets on. It's so annoying how they care so little about science. Oh, we mentioned Donald Trump before. It looks like he's in this. They all have a big fight, and this leads to a confrontation between Kitty and Magneto. Magneto wraps Donald Trump and the rest of the team into some sort of psychic bubble, and they float off into space. They just straight up bail without explanation. Now, I know they had to survive to fight them in the next episode that never happened, but it's a bit daft, isn't it? Kitty thinks that Nightcrawler is dead and has a bit of a cry over it, but he's not dead, he's just hiding in a locker for some reason. I don't know why she's crying, she's known him for like literally 5 minutes. Wolverine is terrible in this, like he's just a bad person.
Well, Wolverine, you were against Kitty being a member of the team. What do you think now?
So the kid got lucky. That don't make her an X-Man. Not yet.
I wonder if when he's in Deadpool 3, they'll make him like this. Just bring him back to the role one final time to just be a prick. And we end on Stan Lee saying, whatever the peril, the X-Men will be there. But they weren't, were they? Because this was never picked up for a full series. Now, funny thing is, I've actually seen this pilot before. I used to own it on video when I was a kid, and I remember there being a segment after it finished where Stan Lee was interviewed and talked about how it would be good if a network picked it up so they could do a full series of stories about the animated X-Men, which I guess did eventually happen, because in 1992, the X-Men The Animated series began, which was a lot better than this mess of a pilot. Plus we got some good memes from it. So where do I rank this among the other unaired pilots that we've talked about? Well, this wasn't good, was it? But nostalgia is messing with me head a little bit, so I'm gonna be kind to it and put it at the higher end of the awful category. That's definitely rose-tinted glasses, isn't it? This pilot was so messy. They're actually bringing back the 90s X-Men series, aren't they? It was announced a few years ago and it somehow doesn't feel any closer to coming out. I'm sure we'll see it on Disney Plus in a few years' time. Hopefully it's better than this garbage. Right, are there any other unaired pilots you want me to talk about? If so, let me know in the comments, and subscribe, help us get to 4K. Right, there you go.